Hello chums, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today! Today we're trying out one of the many LT5 swaps available in Gran Turismo 7. I have featured one before, fitted to the Corvette C4, a car that is vastly more advanced than today's axe murderer. That C4 decapitated me multiple times, and this C2 is almost 30 years its senior. I'm not expecting great things. As usual, every upgrade has been fitted and none of the settings have yet been touched, except for the downforce, which is maxed, the transmission, which has already been adjusted for this car, and some weight had to be added in order to get the performance point rating to show up. With all of the upgrades and no ballast weight, the maligned warning triangle will appear, rendering the car unusable. The C2 has aftermarket wheels a few sizes up from standard. This can increase agility, but it can also come at the cost of some stability. I have fitted a front splitter for front downforce, and an unforgivably ugly custom wing for rear downforce. If you intend on running this car on slick tyres, a rear wing is pretty much a necessity. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. The test track for today was Trial Mountain. Rather predictably, I was met with all of the wheel spins. This car is an uncontrollable bastard, and anyone who would even think about putting 1100 horsepower into a car like this is a lunatic. I don't really know where to start in regards to describing its handling characteristics, because they are all so terrible that the car makes almost no sense. Oi! As usual, the most obvious of all the negatives is the floppy old suspension. Take that, you prick. The car wallows and lumbers and pitches and feels overall terrible to drive. Well, fuck that for a laugh. Unsurprisingly, the first thing I did was increase the natural frequency and the anti-roll bar stiffness. This will reduce body roll and hopefully allow me to make some sense of the rest of the car. Already, there was a massive improvement. The pitching and the wallowing that made the car so completely uncontrollable was now almost gone. Oh, move, you pillock! With that, I could concentrate on what else needed fixing. It will likely not surprise you to find out that rear traction is the Corvette's main problem. Even breathing on the throttle out of a corner will result in sudden and violent oversteer. The car also suffers with some mild instability when braking. Next up, I adjusted the rest of the suspension. I increased compression, which usually helps the car over curves. I reduced camber, which improves traction in a straight line, and also braking to a limited extent. Reducing it more at the rear will also help with braking instability at the expense of adding some power oversteer. I also added some rear toe in to reduce power oversteer, and some front toe out to help with braking instability. Oh, bloody hell. There were some subtle improvements, but it was a bit difficult to tell because the car will still spin its wheels up to 160 miles per hour. Oh, move it, you piss pig. Braking instability was reduced. The trade-off is that there is a small amount of understeer on corner entry, something that is very quickly cancelled out by tapping the throttle. My final tweaks were to the differential. I reduced acceleration sensitivity, which will make the car slightly less quick to transition to oversteer out of corners. Braking sensitivity was also reduced, which will make the brakes feel sharper. I also accepted the inevitable, and added more ballast weight to the rear axle. While this will negatively impact braking performance, the improvement in traction out of corners will more than make up for it. I also slightly reduced front downforce to improve stability at high speeds. The added weight over the rear axle meant that the car will no longer wheel spin in third gear. This is great news because the car will now only spin its wheels to 120 miles an hour. The brakes are noticeably worse, but not enough to cancel out the benefits of the increased traction. The reduction in braking sensitivity on the differential has also taken away some of the mid-corner understeer that was introduced with the previous set of adjustments. So now it was time to head to the Nurburgring. Initially the car performed okay, however I ran into some issues on the compressions, where the suspension appeared to sag like my tits, which made the car wander in a direction I didn't want it to go. This culminated at the foxhole when the car removed my head. Ow. I had to make a few changes. I increased compression further, as well as rear natural frequency and anti-roll bars to try and prevent the sagging. It didn't fix it completely, but it did help. I also added a little bit more weight to the rear, increased initial torque to make the car less agile and thus more stable, and I reduced front downforce even further still. I am not a fan of the LT5 engine in Gran Turismo 7. Don't get me wrong, I like LS and LT swaps as much as the next tea-drinking plummy twat whose country doesn't have enough access to GM's lovable pushrod V8. However, the LT5 is just too much. Not to mention, out of all of the LS and LT engines in the game, the LT5 sounds the worst. Well, that and the LS7 drift car engine. I am a firm believer that the LS9 from the Corvette C6 ZR1 doesn't get anywhere near enough love, and that engine sounds godly once it's upgraded. If you don't believe me, watch my video on the Pontiac Firebird. The LS9 also gets about 130 horsepower less once fully upgraded, and much less torque, so it's slightly less excessive. If not that, I'd make a case for the Rampage engine that's available for the DeLorean, which has similar power to the LT5 but less torque and a smoother delivery, and once again it sounds better. Still, I'll take this over the turbo LS7 from the drift car any day, because I appreciate not waiting 2 years for turbo lag only to be spun like a top. The Corvette C2 is a car that performs better than expected, but it will still absolutely kill you in an instant, even with all the adjustments I've made to try and tame it. I spent most of this lap on a total knife edge when it comes to control. If I were to offer some advice, it would be to buy the new body reset and just get stage 1 and 2 of the weight reduction, along with the body rigidity increase. Then limit the car to just under 1000 horsepower. It's miles nicer to drive and not much slower. Mind you, it is pretty funny that a car from 1963, that is 62 years ago, is on track to beat some much more advanced machinery. In the end, the C2 got a 6 minutes 27, which only just beats a van. It also beats a Shelby Cobra, and several cars that it probably shouldn't be able to though. It is thoroughly embarrassed by the demon-swapped classic Charger though. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my sittings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time where I'm driving a car that isn't approaching retirement age. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I'd greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care, and ta-ra. Take that, you prick.